Hello. Uh, can people see my screens or see my presentation at all? No feedback at all on this thing. Sorry about this. Oh, great. Raised a hand. I do have the Slack window open. If you have questions, I'll be in the talks channel there. Yeah, so let's get started. I am here to talk about prioritizing UX content. And that means not only talking about what UX content is, like which of the content are we talking about, but why should we prioritize it, how to prioritize it, and who is responsible for making it. So let's get going. Let's start with what UX content is. We're going to start actually with what the business wants to do, or the organization that is making an experience at all. In general, they're going to start at the top of this circle, and they want to attract people into that experience. They want to convert people into either paying customers or at least engaged in customers. They want people downloading an app or using the web app or whatever it is. They want to onboard people into that experience, engage them. If something breaks, support them. And they want to transform people into repeat users and re-attract them into the next thing they're making, or transform them into people who bring their friends and family, coworkers and colleagues along. But people aren't here just to be attracted and converted. People come to it because they are investigating. They are verifying if this is the right experience for them. Then they commit to it. And that might be that download or that buying motion. Then they set it up and they use it. If something breaks, I guess they have to fix it, and they want to be able to do that with as little effort as possible. They actually want to think this isn't broken at all. They just want to keep going. They might come to prefer it, and we can often use our support motion to help them prefer this and trust this experience over any other. And then they might come to champion that experience and promote it to their friends and relatives and colleagues, etc. So content can help us do this. Content like ads and articles and outreach and Twitter postings can help that happen. In the investigate stage, the endorsements and reviews and product ratings help people verify that it'll work for them. But when they get into the experience, maybe they need get started guides. They might need a first run experience where they need to set up their account for the first time, or just be shown the first thing to do. They also need to start using it. They need to see the titles and button labels and everything that makes sense for them. If there's game and experience content, like the story of a game narrative, or even just the neighborhood descriptions that they might see in a product like Google Earth, that is all in this using. Then troubleshooting, error messages, alerts, when things break or when events happen and they need to be brought back in or brought to a specific place in that experience. The conferences, training, forums, profile ratings, badges, that's all about preferring and championing and making those things happen. So that's a ton of content. That is not what we are talking about here. The UX content is really about this lower half. It's when commitment has already happened. And that is, they're in it, right? This is where not the realm of marketing up here, where we are trying to get people into the experience and we only expect to get a certain percentage of the funnel in. And it's not sales, where we are really trying to make the end of that funnel count. It is 100% of the people that we see should understand what we're doing and have a great experience. So why should we prioritize it? Well, content is fundamental to what design is for, right? Like design is what we're establishing the whole realm here. And let me break that into 3 parts. We need to create usability. We need to convey that brand, and we need to manage liability. And we frequently do that with words. So let's talk about usability. For usability best practices, almost all of them for usability best practices that you might see on Nielsen Norman Group or other places, it comes down to landing it in the words as well as other places. Like, to be accessible, we need it to be in our users' languages. We need it to be at a low or appropriate reading level, and we need it to be ready for screen readers to come along and use. We need it to be purposeful. That is, it needs to be obvious that the person can meet their goals and that the organization can meet their own goals. You know what? I sound super squeaky, and I apologize. I blame that it's pollen season here in Seattle, and all of the flowers are blooming, and my voice has been terrible. So let's keep going. It's purposeful. It is also concise. It is getting out of people's way. It is just brief and relevant, getting them going, getting them to their purpose. It's also conversational. We're using familiar ideas in familiar phrases, right? We're not introducing new ways of saying things where that's not necessary and where it would stand out to them in a bad or obstructive way. We're also putting useful steps in a logical order, just like when we're actually trying to be helpful to people in real life. We also wanted to just be clear. We want unambiguous results. Like, when we're making progress, we want to know. We want the how-to and policy info to be easy to find. We want our error messages not to be like invalid state, code X32Z1. We want it to be like, hey, try again, or try this thing, go here. And we want consistent terminology. And that means both that the same word means the same thing all the way through an experience, and that same idea all the way through an experience uses the same word instead of using several words. So let's talk about conveying the brand. All of those things were just things about usability. We want to demonstrate the product principles. We want to talk about things, the ideas or the concepts that are aligned to what the brand is about, what the product is about. We want to design our word choice so that when we are using jargon, it's things that we've decided to use that align to our product principles. We want to choose how many words are we going to use. Like, it's a best practice to be concise for usability, but sometimes we want to show that we are empathizing. Sometimes we want to include more concepts than are strictly necessary because it conveys the right ideas. We also want to imagine our grammar and design that. Do we want to be using an active voice or a passive voice? Do we want in English to be using really simple subject, verb, object sentences? Or do we want to get crazier than that? Punctuation. I get asked this an awful lot. Capitalization and punctuation are the things that I get asked about the most often at my job and on Twitter and LinkedIn is, but what are the rules? What are the right things? And honestly, they should be designed. They are tools in our toolkit that we should be designing to convey the right ideas. So the third thing is about managing liability. And this one, we frequently leave up to our attorneys or our outside counsel. But what content is doing is protecting the organization and the person using it. So a couple of examples for regulations. So for data privacy, people need to know what data you're collecting, what controls they have, where you store it, and for how long. And how you talk about it matters, right? If you talk about it, if the only way you talk about it is in 10-point or 8-point font, all in 2 or 3 paragraphs that they have to read through in order to understand it, you're not behaving in a particularly trustworthy manner. We can do a lot with our language to do better. Also, in marketplaces, people need opportunities to make an informed purchase without feeling tricked into a premature buy decision or committing to the purchase early. We also need to do the restorations so that those final or destructive actions are clear. Very related to that marketplace thing, they not only need to know what the terms and conditions are and what those policies are, they need to know, have an "are you sure" step if you're deleting a file, for example, or something like that. They also need to know what are the limitations. Sometimes these are the caveats. If we have details about the promises like free or this will be available forever, our content needs to make it clear how that happens. And it needs to do that in a usable way, and it needs to do it in a way that conveys the brand. So we've talked about all of these things. Usability consists of accessible, purposeful, concise, conversational, clear concept, vocabulary, verbosity, grammar, punctuation, capitalization, and the regulations, restorations, and limitations. Holy mackerel, there's an awful lot to consider about the UX content. So how do we prioritize it? Here's a structure that has worked for me in my roles. Usually I've been coming in and talking about coming into new organizations that are new to having a UX content strategist and saying, here's what I can do for the business. Here's what I can do for our users. Here's how I'm going to do it. So here's how. I use this matrix. I say, is it urgent? Is it less urgent? And I say, is it important or is it less important? So if I can make those two decisions, I guess it's, one decision here, urgent or less urgent, and one decision here, important or less important, then I can decide what to do first. When it's both important and urgent, I do it, right? Like there's no time like the present. When it's still important, but less urgent, I schedule it and I protect that time and I make sure that it gets done. When it's urgent, but less important, I say, who is it important to? That is the person to start that thing. And then when it's less urgent and less important, that is the stuff that I find ways to not do because I am busy up here with the do and the schedule. This actually is sometimes called the Eisenhower Matrix for President Eisenhower in the US, who said, if it's important and urgent, I do it. If it's less urgent, I schedule it, and otherwise I don't do it. This has been improved on. So for the UX content, what that means is that designing text for new experiences, like those experiences that we've decided as an organization, we need this to happen. We're not quite sure how, we're designing it. We need to be right in there designing that text in that experience. We also need to write the text that affects liability. And we need to be unblocking design, engineering, and research for those last minute strings that come up right before shipping. Less urgent, but very, very important, is that we need to be researching what is effective about this text. What makes it usable? What makes it effective? What is hurting it there? And when we know what we've researched, we need to repair it. If it is not being effective, if it is not usable, we need to do that repair work. We also need to know our voice and our terminology. And we need to have established that in a concrete way so that we can make these repairs effectively and so that we can unblock the design for new experiences in the correct voice. And we need to partner on the design strategy because that voice and terminology and how we increase usability across our products, content is necessary there. Less important is like first drafts of super common or error text. If it is a very first draft and yet not like part of an overall design process, the person for whom it is urgent, whether that's a PM or an engineer or a designer, should write that first draft and they should write it for real. And then they can be helped. Maybe it ships like that and it gets put into this less urgent, still important repair, like where we test it and we say, was it effective in this way? And can we repair it? And then what is less urgent and less important is arguing about grammar. I tend to get people saying, oh, I really worry about my words around you because, you're a word expert. And I make up words and grammar all the time because that's my heritage growing up using the English language, where that's all we do is we steal vocabulary and grammar from other languages and make it up as we go. So who is responsible for all of that? This part gets a little tricky. When we have a fully staffed design team, we have the writer the designer, the PM, the research engineer, marketer, sometimes sales folks, the whole team is in the design for the new experiences. And anybody can come up with that initial text, and then the writer refines it and iterates on it and comes up with it themselves. Writing the text that affects liability. Writers work with attorneys, with privacy pros, with anybody who owns those regulatory relationships. And then unblocking design and research and engineering, the writer just goes and does that. To research the text effectiveness and the usability, the writer is generally right in there saying, here's what the heuristics are saying is probably broken. Can we direct some attention here? And or the researcher or the data analyst is saying like, whoa, we're not meeting our bar over here. We're not getting to our metrics. We're not getting to the level of engagement or usage or conversion that we want. What can we do about the text here? When it comes to repairing the existing broken content that we've identified from that research, the writer works with the designer, sometimes just directly with the engineer, frequently directly with the engineer, saying, here are the updates we need to make. And actually, frequently, writers are in the code and have a check-in buddy to say, I've updated the code here. Can you make sure I'm not breaking anything, and let's run those unit tests? For updating the voice and terminology, that's usually a partnership with marketing because the whole brand needs to talk the same way. The terminology, I've never met an engineering team that doesn't have engineers who are deeply invested in how we talk about the key ideas that are usually represented by terminology in our products. And then partnering on design strategy, we have our researchers, we have our designers, we have our UXers as a whole, and generally we also work with marketing and everybody else. But notice that we've got writers throughout this, right? And that's making it a unified whole so that all of this work can be balanced and scheduled in an appropriate way. It means that anybody can write these first drafts of the common or error text, and the writer can support them in doing that by providing the voice and terminology that they can follow and providing the usability guidelines. And it means that nobody has to enforce some external standard of grammar. It's like, oh, well, my third grade English teacher said that we never use contractions when it's formal, and I believe this should be formal, etc. So nobody has to do that. Very differently when we don't have a writer in-house. And this is most design teams and most product teams around the planet still don't have their own writers. Here's what that means. Notice that I've disappeared writers from all of this. There's no writer to unblock design. The designers, PMs, researchers, engineers, marketers, somebody in this group, in my experience, usually loves writing somehow, right? Maybe they got great marks in writing in school. Maybe they write on the side. Maybe they write fiction. Great. Somebody is designing the text here. Frequently, it's everybody together and nobody really owning it. So many long meetings where people are arguing about the best way to go forward. Then the text that affects liability. The attorney is asked for it. The attorney provides it, and we ship it. Doesn't matter what it says. Then in the researching, the researcher and data analyst look at where it's broken, but don't necessarily have the tools or the expertise to really pinpoint, hey, here's a grammatical construct that people might not be as aware of. So let's change that up. For repairing the existing broken content, that usually comes down to the designer or sometimes just the engineers. For updating the voice and terminology, there's no writer in the room. It's the marketers and the researchers, and still the engineers. And partnering on design strategy, there's no content expert in the room. It means that first drafts of common error or error text, anybody still totally fair game because everybody has to do it. And then enforcing that external standard of grammar means that everybody is doing that. Everybody is saying, for this new text up here, boy, I really hope we want to get this right. We want to be very usable. We want to make sure this works. So how's it going to work? Everybody works on it. So to refresh, with a writer, that gets easier. I have a bias there, of course. So we've talked about very, very rapidly what UX content is, why we should prioritize it, because it affects everything we do in our designs and everything we are trying to do with our designs. We've talked about how to prioritize it using this urgent, important matrix. And we've talked about who is responsible for it in various places. And that's all I got, folks. Thank you very, very much.